I've received a lot of requests for additional information on the command board that we use in Harrisburg, along with my command sheet and how I run command on an incident. I'm happy to share that information with you, but it comes with a small caveat. I need to make clear from the beginning that the way I and my department utilize this equipment and run our commands does not necessarily translate directly to you, your department, or your system. Our system has evolved and continues to evolve based on our department, the resources we work with, the region we work in, and the operating guidelines and policies that have been developed over the years based on working in that environment. You should take this information and vet it against your own factors and develop or apply the command system that works best for you and your department. Hopefully, by sharing this information, others can develop an understanding of how we operate and take from that some tips that might work in their system. Certainly, this isn't the only or best way, but it's the way that's worked for us. We continue to train on, test, and modify our system as new information, equipment, and procedures become available. It is a never-ending process. To understand how the system works and is applied on the fire ground, I'm going to take a few minutes to describe some of the training, preparation, and other important factors that go into the development of the fireground command system first. Let's start off with some generalities. No matter what type of equipment you use or policies you have in place, an effective command structure is based on a few main areas. Number 1, education and training. Number 2, drilling on requisite skill sets. Number 3, continuous review and improvement. The environment in which we operate, which includes the people, the structures, and what's in the structures, is constantly evolving, and we have to keep up. Not only do we need to understand both legacy and modern building construction, but we must understand how modifications, both legal and illegal, affect the structure, its performance, and both fire and human behavior. Seeking education in these areas, as well as continuous reading on related subjects, is vital to staying on course and keeping up with the ever-evolving environment in which we operate. Developing an ongoing training on these topics, as well as consistent and meaningful review of policy and guidelines, is critical to effective performance. For us to operate effectively at every level at an incident, we must first gather and share pre-incident intelligence on the environment in which we respond. We should be out in and monitoring changes in our neighborhoods. We should be looking at the history of the area, what it was, how it's changed, how it stayed the same. We should learn the prevalent types of construction and any idiosyncrasies of the construction and the neighborhoods themselves. We should get out into the neighborhoods, meet the people, get to know them, let them get to know us. We should learn about the cultures present in our areas. Cultures and their norms will affect how people react to stress and perform under such situations. It's helpful to try and understand various cultures in your area before you meet people while their homes are burning, because everything becomes more challenging to figure out at that point. Learn and pass on historical information about the neighborhoods. That should include previous fires and any special situations or challenges that may have come up at those fires. Getting out into the neighborhoods and conducting walk-and talks with crews is a great way to see and pick up on the nuances of the various sections of your response district. Getting out and walking versus just driving through forces us to slow down and gives us the opportunity to notice those little details that might affect us in a big way during a fire. The more information we can gather and share prior to an incident, the more prepared and efficient we will be when we're called to respond to a fire in that area. Our districts will continue to change whether we pay attention or not. It's in our best interest to get out there and find out what's going on. As we gather pre-incident intelligence, that information can be used to develop new and/or modify existing policy, guidelines, and training materials. Response packages and performance. I consider our response package all things that relate to the deployment and operation of our resources during a fire incident. It is not only the physical components or policies, but it is also our performance and how our personnel utilize what is available to them. If we just look at this category of factors holistically, we risk looking past many of the little details that become so important when operating at a fire. So it is important to take a quick look at how these areas can affect our operation. We'll look specifically at the following, though this list could include many other areas. We'll discuss task level skill sets, resource and resource availability and associated staffing levels, policies and operating guidelines, apparatus design, layout, equipping, and staffing, developing an understanding of how our personnel operate, and fireground tempo generated by our personnel and resources. Task level skill sets. This is the core of our operation. Task level skills allow for the firefighter to carry out tactics, and tactics carry out strategies on the fireground. If we cannot carry out the most basic skills, we'll be challenged to ever gain the upper hand at an incident. Task level skills are things such as donning gear, stretching lines, throwing ladders, forcing doors, searching buildings, ventilating roofs, and operating pumps. They are all the individual skills that a firefighter might be called upon to carry out during an incident. They are also the points where we run into the most friction. They are the points where pressure builds up like behind a strainer in the water. It is at this level, with these tasks, that the battle is won or lost. A firefighter's ability to carry out task-level skills effectively and efficiently is critical to the overall success of the entire fireground operation. If you are not putting emphasis on these skills and their mastery, you are failing your personnel and setting everyone up for eventual failure. The fireground is unforgiving. In the battle between firefighters and the fire gets a vote and strikes with impunity. Continuous preparing at the task level is one of the most important things a firefighter will do in their career. Resource and resource availability and associated staffing levels. Developing and evaluating plans for responses is critical to getting the appropriate amounts and types of equipment and the appropriate number of personnel to an incident in order to effectively and efficiently mitigate the challenge presented to you. Planning everything from firehouse locations to mutual aid agreements is an important part of being prepared to quickly respond to and control a fire when it occurs. Staffing levels make a difference on the fireground. When staffing is an issue, it leads to the triaging of critical tactics. And when we're triaging tactics in what is supposed to be a coordinated fire attack, we are putting the entire operation, our personnel, the citizens, and their property at risk. While these decisions are often made at places far from the fireground, their result is felt nowhere more strongly than in the hot, dark, and smoky hallways of the fire floor. It's everyone's responsibility to advocate and sometimes fight for appropriate resources, assignments, and staffing. We must also ensure that these critical components of our response plan be in place every day, 24 hours a day. The fire does not know or care what day of the week it is, or what time of the day it is, or if there is 1 or 4 firefighters on that rig. Policies and operating guidelines. Going out the door without vetted and proven policies and operating guidelines is like going out the door for the first time, every time. Firefighters and incident commanders will be forced to make it up as they go, with no guidance or cohesiveness to their operation. This leads to friction points and ineffective and inefficient delivery of service that will cause failure, injury, and deaths. Having policies and guidelines just to have them, however, can also be a challenge. Many times they are not fully thought out, and sometimes they're just copied and pasted from other, very dissimilar departments. Operating guidelines must be based on your department and system, the resources you work with, and the environment that you work in. Once in place, they must be regularly reviewed, discussed, and trained upon. Simply having them on the shelf is not enough. Apparatus design, layout, equipping, and staffing. Utilizing apparatus that is designed specifically for the needs of our districts is important in being able to efficiently, smoothly, and safely arrive and operate at the incidents we respond to. It is critical that departments take the time to study and select apparatus, options, and equipment that makes sense for their response districts and the fire challenges they face within them. Poor apparatus specs and equipment choices create additional challenges for many firefighters across the country. We should take the time to evaluate and test equipment and then use it to augment and improve operations rather than using equipment that makes our jobs more difficult than they really should be. Finding ways to appropriately staff apparatus is a challenge that everyone should be working towards. When we don't have enough firefighters, when we're forced to make serious choices of what we can and can't do on the fireground, that leads to unsafe conditions and inherently unsafe environments. Staffing is a critical component to the conducting of effective fireground operations. Developing an understanding of how your personnel operate. One of the most important benefits from conducting regular drilling on task-level skill sets and multi-company drills is the ability to evaluate performance and develop an understanding of the strengths and weaknesses, as well as the time and resources required to carry out various operations. Having this information is important on the fire ground as we are evaluating the progress and effectiveness of our fire attack. It is also important when reviewing operations after the fact as we evaluate and determine what our friction points are in order to develop training and guidance to improve future operations. Fireground tempo generated by your personnel and resources. Following closely with the understanding of how your personnel conduct operations is how efficiently those operations are conducted. Tempo on the fireground is a critical component in evaluating effectiveness of operations. It's crucial in the survival of victims and gaining the upper hand over fire progression. Tempo is affected by fire progression and firefighter capability and efficiency. The fire's unimpeded progress, along with fuel availability or victim potential, directly affects the speed with which the firefighters must act. As an incident commander, you must consistently evaluate the speed of fire growth versus the speed at which the firefighters are operating. By knowing how your firefighters operate and the average times it takes them to carry out operations in unobstructed areas, you can evaluate their efficiency on the fireground. This is important data to consider when evaluating the progress of the overall operation. Responding, arrival, and engagement. By now, you should be developing an understanding of the fact that intelligence gathering never stops. Certainly, the ride to the incident is no exception. It is during this time that you should not only be physically gearing up, but you should also be mentally focusing on the specific battle that lies ahead. Listening closely to the incident dispatch can provide you critical pieces of the puzzle that you will need to begin developing your incident size-up. Listen to the information that's presented. What does it tell you? What doesn't it tell you? And how is it being told to you? The first part of the information generally is the box area or location. This starts focusing our lens on the neighborhood, the cultures within, and the construction types present in the areas that we're responding to. The time of day is critical for several reasons. It can clue us into street conditions, traffic, and congestion, and the friction points we might encounter along the way. What it doesn't tell us really anything about is the occupants. For many years, time of day did offer some idea of potential occupants or where they might be within a home or occupancy. But with the drastic evolution of how our society works and educates, we can no longer rely on this to develop a good idea of who or how many might be within any particular occupancy. It is best to assume that it is occupied, and in the worst case scenario way. You can always adjust the scale of your thought process as you gather more information. As we continue to listen to the dispatch and additional information while responding, we should be listening for the information that is left out as well. What we don't know about a building or fire is just as critical as what we do know. Listening and hearing what isn't being told to you continues to focus the lens on what we need to find out upon our arrival. Listening to the voice of the dispatcher, especially those you've come to know, can also provide some idea of the severity of the incident. Even the most calm and cool voices have tells if you're paying attention. That is one reason why it is critical to develop a relationship with your communications staff. When we know each other, and when we interact with each other, we can begin to develop an understanding of the stress responses in their voices and their words. Again, picking up on these nuances helps us to focus the lens just a little bit more. The information provided by the dispatcher can give us some idea of what's going on, or at least the level of a response we should be preparing for. Things like the number of calls being received, whether they are also receiving fire alarms or reports of people trapped in the building, can be helpful in developing an idea of the scale of the incident. Of course, many of us have been to incidents where this information has led you to believe you were most definitely going to a fire, only to arrive to someone barbecuing on their balcony. So you should take this and all information at face value, assume the worst, and scale it back as needed once it's confirmed with first-hand intelligence. A quick thought on lack of imagination. So many times, lack of imagination or unwillingness to accept information being presented has been a critical factor in catastrophic failure. The Battle of the Little Bighorn, the attack on Pearl Harbor, the meltdown at 3 Mile Island, the Space Shuttle Challenger, the attacks on 9/11, are just a few of the many examples where people were sounding the alarm or providing the information that something very bad was about to happen, and no one heeded or questioned their ideas. When we're operating in an ever-changing environment with so many unknowns, so many complex systems, so many potential friction or failure points, we must take the time to listen to and vet the outlier ideas and information. Too many times, those ideas or that information has been summarily dismissed, and the operations marched headlong into failure and too often tragedy. Keep your mind open to the potential, both known and unknown. As you respond, keep your eyes scanning the horizon, and of course on the road if you're driving. Is there smoke? Is there a lot of it? Is it pressurized and thick, or is it thin and lazy? Is it being dispersed by the wind? What color is it? As you get closer, is the traffic backing up? Are people gathered? Are they just watching, or are they moving around in a stressed or panicked way? Are they moving cars out of the way? Are they taking belongings out of the building? Are they trying to access people on the inside? Is it calm or is it chaotic? On the other hand, is there no one around at all? All of this tells us something and continues to focus the lens on the situation you're responding to. When you arrive on the block, start focusing on the conditions. Can the apparatus get in? Is there a water supply close by? Is it accessible? What types of buildings are here? Are they attached? Are they close? What is the exterior cladding? Are there exposure issues? Where is the fire? How much is there? Where is it going? Where and how can we stop it? Are there victims presenting? How bad is their situation? How many of them are there? How easily can we get to them? Can we get to them at all? The building. As we arrive and begin to assess and size up the scene, we have to look past the chaos that may be present, the smoke and the fire showing, and take a serious look at the building that's involved and those that may become involved. We should look at the setback. Is it normal or is it longer than normal? Is the building attached, detached, close, or far from other buildings? What is the size and number of stories of the buildings? What is the construction type? What is the exterior covering? Can you tell if the structure is involved or is it just contents? Is the fire in the voids? Does the building have a peaked or flat roof? Is the fire in the knee wall or cockloft? How is the building performing under fire conditions? Is it compromised or still holding up to the insult of the fire? What was the condition of the building before the fire? Are there any obvious modifications to the building? Is there a basement? Is the fire in there? Can we commit to the interior? After quickly assessing the arrival side of the building for answers to the above questions, look at the smoke and fire more closely. What is the color, volume, density, and velocity of the smoke? Can you start to pinpoint potential areas for the seat or main body of fire? Is the smoke and fire exiting the building under pressure? Is it lazy and non-aggressive? At this point, if it's not already been completed, provide a brief initial report on the incident. This should include the number of stories, building construction type, occupancy type, fire conditions present, and their location. Establish command and call out the mode of operations. Then continue your initial size up of the incident. Once you take that quick initial look at the building and fire conditions, attempt an occupant interface if there's one to speak to. Ask them if they know what happened. This can help pinpoint the location of the main body or seat of the fire. Ask them if there are other persons or animals that they are aware of still in the building. If they say no, ask them who else lives there. Ask them, could they be in there? Make an attempt at getting as much potential victim intelligence as possible. I like to use Chief Castro's SIGNAL acronym to aid in the search size up. We'll talk more about that when we cover the initial command worksheet. It's important to remember that if there is searchable space, we are searching regardless of what the initial reports might be. We give potential fire victims every opportunity for possible survival. Relay any information that you require to the crews who will be operating on the interior of the building. As this is all taking place, you should be moving towards conducting a 360 of the building or getting as close to that as possible. If you can't get a full 360, then getting a report from the roof firefighter will be critical in completing the view. Let's take a look at the 360. On the 360, we should be looking for people trapped or that have jumped, building conditions, fire and smoke conditions presenting on the other sides of the building. Are there any hazards or complications presenting? Are there any access issues, or can we get companies around back? Where's the fire? How much fire is there? Where can it or where is it already going? And what can we do to stop it? What do we need to accomplish that? Is there anything present that is going to prevent us or complicate us from doing so? Is there anything that creates a no-go situation? Is there a basement? Is the fire in the basement? Is there access to the basement from the exterior? Is there a grade change? And does that change expose an additional level? Is it windy? Is that affecting the fire? Are there exposure issues? There are other incident-specific questions that the conditions present will lead you to, but those are the basics of what we should be thinking about when we're taking that initial lap. The 360 is not a one-and-done thing, though. Someone has to keep watching back here, and an officer should be assigned to cover this sector as soon as possible. The risk assessment. I've mentioned a few times the go-no-go situation. All of the intelligence gathered by our size-up and assessments that we conduct in the pre-incident, response, and arrival stages should be processed and evaluated in order to quickly determine the initial mode of operations and to develop an initial incident action plan. We are evaluating the information we've gathered and we're currently observing to determine if we can reasonably and with relative safety initiate interior operations in the building that is on fire. This may be an easy yes or no in some cases, but in some, which we'll call marginal, we have to determine how much risk is appropriate for the potential gain. Those are the tough ones. This is where it gets a little bit gray. This is a friction point that we must navigate. There are more factors to consider here than just the face value factors that are being presented by the fire. We should consider our sworn oath to the public. We should consider what we've told them we will do on their behalf. We must consider what we are willing to potentially lose in the attempt to accomplish the gain we're looking for. This is as much a moral call as it is a scientific one. Some people will never understand this. Some people will tell me I'm wrong. But as an incident commander, I must come to a decision that is best for the situation presenting and will allow me to look into the eyes of a citizen or a firefighter's family and say, we did what was justified in the moment. We did what met our obligations to always serve and serve with. That can be a tough one. And if you're not willing or ready to wrestle with that dilemma and the potential consequences of your choices, then you're not ready to be in the position to make those calls. It's something that I don't take lightly, and neither should anybody else. We should all know by the time we get to our first fire that the consequences of raising your hand and swearing that oath could be your own injury or death, or the injury or death of those you send into battle. We cannot minimize the value of our oath nor its potential consequences. The best way to be prepared for these moments is to never, ever stop learning, never stop preparing, never stop reviewing, never stop readjusting, never stop a continuous improvement mindset. When you swear that oath, you not only acknowledge the potential that you will lay down your life, but that you will act in a way that makes that possibility as remote as you can. And you do this for those you serve with, their families, your family, and yourself. Risk is a condition of our job. Managing that risk as effectively as possible is an obligation of our oath. Risk management is not an excuse for cowardice. Making the call. Once the intelligence is gathered and evaluated, once the size up is completed and the risk acknowledged, it's time to call the play. How are you and your crews going to attack this fire? For us, our default mode is interior fire attack. The crews will arrive and deploy with this in mind unless someone calls a different play. It can be the first arriving officer or apparatus who calls for something different, or anyone who discovers something that changes the conditions that allow for our default play. We've gathered intelligence, we've educated and prepared, we've developed operating guidelines, we've set up our apparatus to be effective in our environment, we've developed task-level skill sets, we've discussed strategy and tactics, and the plays that we have at our disposal. We reviewed our previous performances, and we adjusted where we needed to. So when the moment comes that a play is called, and we either go with the default or call an audible, the crews understand the calls, pivot if needed, and execute the assignments with as little friction as possible. It takes work, it takes dedication, cooperation, and a little humility and vulnerability. But if you commit to the process, oh wait, you did that when you swore your oath. If you commit to the process, the plays will be easier to call and easier to execute each and every time. In the next section, we'll discuss the initial tactical worksheet and how it is utilized to guide and track the incident from this point forward. Thank you for listening to part 1 of this series on how I go from pre-response to establishing a command post and command structure on an incident with the equipment and resources that we have available. Hopefully you found it beneficial, and you'll come back and listen to the second and third parts of the series when they come out shortly.